Did you know that journaling helps with emotional regulation? I'm sure you did. But this particular method of journaling is pretty unheard of, and I only recently discovered it in a Huberman Lab podcast episode a few days ago. And I tried to implement it, and I feel that it is something that works. So I want to share with you this method and what I think about it. So let's jump right in. I'll make a summary of the Huberman Lab podcast episode and give my experience so that you can better understand how it works and what are the general concepts that you need to know before going into this approach. I'm sure you know about journaling, which is keeping a diary, writing about the day-to-day things you do, be it on tasks that you do or regarding objectives you have. Journaling is something that everybody does a bit, so I'm not going to go deeper in that. There's also gratitude journaling, which is writing about things we are grateful for. That has a lot of benefits too. But this approach is called expressive writing. It has a lot of studies actually that has documented this approach and shown the benefits of it, and most notably by Professor Pennebaker. The task in itself is pretty simple. It is to write about one of our most profound, traumatic, or very stressful experiences. And you're going to write about it for about 15 to 30 minutes. It is a pretty big window, and you can actually choose whether it's 15, 20, or 30 minutes, because there have been a lot of tests and they tried several times and they all share the same results. So you can choose whether you want to do 15 or 30. And what I did is 20 minutes, and I was a bit short on time. I wanted to write more, but I couldn't. So the suggestion is to not stop writing. Only stop if the emotions are just too hard to process. But if you can continue writing, don't stop unless the emotions are getting too heavy and it's hard to continue writing. I fully understand. And because you are going to write about stressful, even traumatic experiences, so it can be hard to write about them. So if you need to pause, if you need to stop, it's okay. Everybody has limits, and you can do this experience by yourself another time. There's no constraint or anything, so take your time. If it doesn't work on the first try, no worries. You can always try again. And this task, you can either do it on 4 days in a row. So every day you do it. You take 20, 30 minutes to write, and you do it the next day and the next and the next, with 4 times. Or you can do it on 4 separate weeks and 1 day of each week. So 4 days, but on 4 different weeks. So on a month. And results were pretty similar in the studies that looked into participants who did 4 consecutive days or 4 days in a month. So it's again your choice whether you have time, and it can be hard to process and write about these events. So 4 consecutive days can be hard. That is your choice. And so Professor Huberman, he is going to try this approach on 4 different weeks, because time constraints and emotional regulation is not that easy to do. I chose to do it on 4 consecutive days because that was my choice. And well, I'm actually going to talk about it because I've been doing it for the last 3 days. I have my last session tonight. Yes, I did it at night. So I wouldn't recommend doing it at night because the emotions well up and just before going to sleep is not the best time. You put everything in your mind and your mind just races everywhere, and I didn't sleep that well the first night, so I think that has a connection to it. And well, I don't recommend doing it at night. Do it in the morning, at noon, even in the afternoon, but not late afternoon into the night, because it's going to affect your sleep, and it's not easy to go to sleep after surrendering to oneself. Everything is just pent up, and you're just going to ruminate on these things and think over and over about all of that, and it's not easy. So I wouldn't recommend it to do it at night. One of the observations I can make with my experience on the last 3 days is that I have a better apprehension of the event, of the period I am writing about. I think that it is organizing itself. The first day it was kind of going everywhere, and yesterday I was pretty, well, I can categorize the event, actually. I can bring more logical thinking into it, and I can see it in another way, not in a emotional way. Yeah. And well, I brought my writing, so as you can see, I wrote like 2 pages in 20 minutes, and yeah, I did that 3 times, and I'm doing the last one today. We'll see how it turns out, but I think that the consequences are not necessarily on the short term. I'm going to talk about the benefits just after this, but I'm going to explain how it works before. Essentially, what happens when you bring up these emotions, the recall of the particular period, event, experience, it's the fact that most of the time, normally, when you think about your trauma, the emotions are going to come up. And your prefrontal cortex, which is where your logical thinking is, it's going to be a bit inhibited, and you're only going to see the event through emotions and not through the rational brain. And therefore, it's hard for the brain to fully understand the event. I said that I was categorizing better on the 3rd day, and that is pretty logical, because Professor Huberman says that there's a lot of prefrontal cortex activation. That is what we are trying to do. We are trying to link the emotional distress that comes up when you recall such events, such experiences, and try to connect them with our rationalizing part of our brain. Let me explain. This is what is called emotional regulation. We are trying to retrieve a memory which is most of the time purely emotional, and we are going to bring some logic into it. We're going to transform it, still keep the memory, but try to connect it to other things so it can be bearable in a way. And Professor Huberman cites Paul Conti, that wrote the book Trauma. It is a very interesting book about trauma. I haven't read it, but I read The Body Keeps the Score, which talks about how there are repercussions of trauma into the body itself, and that it's not only in our heads, and well, the body is affected too. Most of the therapies and methods to heal, methods for healing, involves emotional regulation, which is taking the memory and bringing logic. Well, there are other complex things going on, but if we oversimplify it, it's bringing logic to this purely emotional memory. I'm not saying that emotions are bad or anything, no. Emotions are what makes us human, and it's just that sometimes these emotions involve pain, and it's hard to get by when you get overwhelmed by it, and being able to heal it just a little with these methods. It's not stripping ourselves of our emotions, but It's bringing a new dimension to it. And I have been saying a lot about bringing logic, but it's really making new connections of this memory that is just repeating itself in our heads, that we keep in the back of our heads and our unconscious. Most of the time when we have these stressful or traumatic events, they keep us at night and we think about them all the time, and it induces stress. It's not easy to talk about, and this particular method is really great it's super simple, zero cost, and well, everybody can do it, and it helps, and it's complementary to therapies and other methods to heal. I want to emphasize the fact that this does not undermine therapy. When you include professionals who know what they do, it's the best way to deal with it. All this to say that this is cerebral plasticity, making new connections for old memories so they can live in a different version with a new dimension, which is logic. Because what happens normally, is that we retrieve this memory and the prefrontal cortex, its activity is diminished during this recall, and therefore we only experience the emotions. The memory solely enacts through emotions. And when this memory is stored with the new connections, there's better understanding, integration, and not just rationalization, not just putting logical things. It's about understanding and being in the present moment and putting things of the past really behind. Because what happens is, during the recall of traumatic events, is we tend to be stuck in the past. We recall these events, these traumas, and we forget about the present. Most methods of emotional regulation is about bringing the past to the present and making the links, making the connections. There are a lot of benefits to this method because it regulates the emotions of one particular event. And I mean, it depends on the person, but these kinds of thoughts always entrain stress, anxiety, and this method can help with that. Reducing anxiety, having better sleep, having a better immune function. Professor Huberman explicitly tells about relieving symptoms of conditions like arthritis, lupus, or fibromyalgia. So these conditions in particular have been studied, and I'm not saying that this method is going to cure these illnesses, but it helps alleviate pain and it helps our mental well-being. I feel that sleep could have been mentioned in the podcast, so I'm going to add a part on sleep, because I think that this emotional regulation is a lot like the REM part of sleep, this second part in our night, where the brain naturally regulates what happened in the day. It's going to just look at everything that happened in the day and try to store our memories. And this emotional regulation, I think, is what we try to activate through this approach, because the brain is just amazing. And what it does is it tries to recognize patterns and try to learn from stressful situations and try to adapt. And the next time we encounter these situations, the brain is prepared to deal with them. And that is what we are trying to do with this approach, is the next time we are going to think about this particular event, the brain is going to say, okay, we already done that, we know what happened, and we have seen it through a new lens before, and this is not as traumatizing. Well, it does not diminish what happened, of course, but the way you perceive it is different after such an approach, such a protocol. So this helps alleviate stress and pain from an event, and well, it's what happens naturally, and sometimes the brain can't function properly and we need to help it, and this is a particular method to help it. To recap, this method is super easy to implement. It's flexible, so you can choose the time window. Either you can write 15 to 30 minutes non-stop. It's better to do it, actually you can do it either on paper or by typing on the computer, so that is your choice. It has the same results, so if you prefer typing, you can. And just don't stop typing for your time window, and you can either do it 4 days in a row or 4 days in a month. That is all you need to know. So I hope that you will have a great experience. Know that you can stop at any time if it just too hard. So no worries, you can do it another time. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that you learned something today and you're going to try out this method. I almost finished with this method, and I think that it's going to help me through this particular event. And share this to someone you know, to a friend, because the best way we learn is by teaching to someone else. So please help. And if you want more details about all of this approach, you can either go onto the references I put in a Notion page in the description below, or going to the episode of the Huberman Lab podcast, where you can hear about this approach from the professor himself. So thank you very much. Have a great day and see you in the next one. Putain, il fait froid.